think everyone's here. Assalamu alaikum, and a big welcome to everyone from the New Beginnings team. And thank you for joining Sunday Night Live. We've not done one for a while, but we are blessed. We're really blessed, and we're really fortunate to be joined by Peter Sanders, who accepted Islam in 1971. And Peter's been photographing the Muslim world and the world, an artist for 50 years now. And you have a number of publications that you've been gathering over the years that document some of your works. So I'm really hoping today is going to give our viewers an insight into your career and just the world that you've witnessed, and also the change that's taken place in the world over the 50 years that you've been documenting things. So so we had a conversation earlier this week in preparation for today's session. And Peter, you stopped me on the use of convert, and it triggered a very interesting conversation. So we've been using the word convert for, since the inception, and the word convert has been used. And the convert-revert debate notwithstanding, you said that you're not keen on the word convert. And it was the first time that I'd heard kind of opposition to the word. But it was interesting. So can you shed some light on why you think the word convert perhaps is problematic?
Welcome to everybody. Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sallam. Yeah, I'm because I'm very English. I have feet in two kind of worlds. So I sit very comfortably in the Islamic world, and I sit fairly comfortably in the English world. And so I tend to see things from two sides of the world. Now, the problem is revert and convert are very heavy words to apply to something which I feel that those words don't really apply to. And they were given or used by people who don't know the English language. And I think that's a big problem with our Islam that we use in the West. Now, revert. When I became a Muslim, I did not revert. The moment I said the Shahada, I was the same person I was before I said the Shahada. I didn't revert to something else. I embraced something. Inshallah, I became a bigger person, a more open person. And the only way I can describe it is if somebody invites you to a luxurious meal, that person has a choice. They can say yes or decline it, and I embraced it. And for me, it was a continuation of already the spiritual journey that I was on. And I think to a non-Muslim, that is a barrier to say that you have reverted to Islam. Because if they're at that point where they're ready to accept Islam, why are they reverting to someone? Now, I know there's this idea that when you're born in that people say that you're born a Muslim. You're not. You're born in the state of fitra, which is purity and the way of purity. But you do not, your journey can take you to become a fire worshipper or whatever, those that were blessed and graced by becoming Muslim, we became Muslims. And also convert is also very confusing. It's like I was something and I converted to something else. See, that wasn't my experience. And when I met one of my first teachers within, within a few weeks of accepting Islam, I went to Morocco and I met a great, great scholar. He was already 100 years old. And when I met him for the first time, and I entered into his room, and all I could feel in that room was an ocean of peace. And I felt so much compassion from that person. And we were introduced to him. I was introduced to him, and then he said to me, now you have two imams, or now you have two guides, Sayyidina Muhammad and Sayyidina Isa. Jesus and Muhammad. He didn't separate me from what I was before. He joined it, and it was a continuation. And that is a very broad understanding of our journey, and specifically my journey as an English person that had accepted Islam. And it was really, you know, there are people you could go today and say, okay, you've become a Muslim, please, everything else before you is wiped, you know, forget everything else. It is not like, I don't believe that's it. And I don't believe that. That's just my personal understanding, actually. So anyway, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I want to find a new word for us. I mean, I'm not a convert, I'm not a revert. I mean, I'm a Muslim, but maybe we need to find a word that implies that we've embraced something, you know, more, you know, or bigger. I mean, of course, Muslim is an accepted term, but I mean, for me, I just don't like those words. And if people want to use those words, we need to find something. We should find a cool word that the youth like, you know. Anyway, that's my, what do you say, preach box for the day.
I think in Malaysia they use the word mu'allif.
Oh,
I'm not sure
that?
if you've. So mu'allif, an Arabic term which means someone whose heart has been reconciled, which is interesting. But they do, they do resort to an Arabic word, which is, you know.
Yeah, that's a beautiful word, though.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I need to make a note. That's a really nice word. Yeah, I mean, I think it just needs a bit of brainstorming. I know one or two scholars I would like to sit with and you know, pick their brains about. You need people who really understand the English language. You know, I've always had a problem with, well, we know the word for wudu, but the English translation is ablution. That's a very old-fashioned word. It's used in the army and stuff, and it doesn't really imply it. Now, somebody gave me a beautiful word, and inshallah before the end of the thing I'll remember it, but it's a beautiful word. It's not used very often in the English language, but it really applies, it really is perfect for that thing that, you know, that we do before prayer. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And on this topic, how important do you see words and terms and articulation of certain concepts and the reality to that term? So if a term is used that's loaded due to other connotations, what effect does that have?
I think it's very problematic because it makes us appear as though we're something different, and humanly we're not different. You know, we are all Bani Adam. We should treat people the same and not differently because they're not the same religious as you know. That is my understanding of the way that Prophet ﷺ, he really treated people as human beings and respect and everything. And this is, we need, if we are to be great ambassadors for this, we really need to understand this. And this understanding has come really for me more in the last year because I've been working on a book about Muslims in China, and I've been fascinated by Muslims in China and Russia since, you know, late 60s, early 70s, the fact that there were Muslims in countries like that, you know, and, you know, I'm really fascinated where Muslims are, where you don't expect them to be. And, you know, it took me 30 years before I went to China, and it was such a powerful experience. And, you know, I began to document them and the history and everything, and I've made various trips there, and I'm working on a book about Muslims in China. And I'm working with a young researcher, and she discovered that in the Ming dynasty, there were two great Muslim scholars on a very high level. They got together and they said, for us to teach Islam to the Chinese, we have to become Buddhist, Taoist, Confucian monks, which they did. They studied those religions so much so that they could be qualified as monks in that religion. And then they got together and they said, well, the Chinese don't speak Arabic. They don't understand Arabic. We cannot use Arabic. And so they used the language of the Taoist Confucian monks. So instead of referring to Allah or God, they used the word the most high or the most real. This is how the monks would refer to. And then they didn't talk about prophets, they talked about great sages. They talked about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as being the great sage. They didn't use the word iman or faith. They talked about a clear light that enters the heart. So then the Chinese could understand that Islam was a continuation of what they already believed in, and therefore it wasn't a threat. And at that time, this is when Islam spread the most, and even the emperor of that time became a Muslim. And he wrote a really beautiful poem dedicated to the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. Yeah. So this kind of came back to me, and I thought, yeah, we've been doing all this wrong, you know, particularly here, that we present Islam as a different culture. You have to dress differently, you know, and for a non-person, this looks strange. Therefore, even if someone, I've met so many English people, they're saying, I can become a Muslim, you know, like they thought like it's like a separate club, or, you know, you have to, you know, like become Arabic or something, like the Jewish faith or something. It's just like there's so much misunderstanding about this, and this does not help us at all, really, I think.
Very, very interesting, and a number of issues that you raised there. If I may, I'm going to go back to something about this model of Chinese, the Chinese Muslim community, and becoming Chinese and understanding the people in order to propagate and spread the message. Where do you think we are in the UK or the West or Europe in terms of this process? And indeed, has the process begun?
I don't think it's begun seriously. I mean, I think there's a few efforts. I mean, if you look at the Cambridge Mosque, for instance, and there's a few other mosques, but, you know, most of the mosques around the country are Arab-looking or Pakistani-looking, or they're some other culture. You know, if you look at the first mosques of China, they're like pagoda temples, really. And you go into it and you think, oh, is this a mosque? But there are elements like you go in and one of the first mosques was built 60 years after Hijrah. That's how quickly they were in China. Mm-hmm. When you go in, it's beautiful. There are gardens, stone, there's a lot of feng shui and bonsai trees, and it's all this very Chinese, Japanesey culture. And you go through these gardens and then you go through these gates. So by the time you actually get to the prayer hall, you're already in a meditative state. You know, all the concerns of the world are kind of leaving you, and you're entering into a peaceful, tranquil zone, you know. And if you know, those who've been to China, the Chinese don't run in and out of mosques like we do. You know, they'll sit and they'll spend time and they'll practice their remembrances, and they'll, you know, it's part of their, you know, part of their daily worship, as well as doing qigong and all these other things that they do, you know. So I found it really interesting, and as an English person, I really aligned to that. It's just kind of, I need that tranquility and peacefulness, you know, and I don't want my prayer to just become another ritual in the day, you know. We need to get the benefit from it as much as we can, you know.
So how do you see that translation looking like, if you were to translate that into an English? And this is a big question, of course. And
yeah, I to be honest, I'm just at the edge of this thing, trying to understand it. I mean, this is a personal age, and I'm trying not to be critical, but a lot of Muslims choose to wear the dress of the Prophet ﷺ, you know, the robe and the turban and these things. And they are beautiful. But if they have to ask himself, if he was alive today, how would he dress? I saw a thing the Turks did. They went on the streets of Istanbul and Ankara, and they asked the people in the street, it was 3 questions. When you think of the Prophet ﷺ, what do you think about? And everybody had their own thing. I think of like a great grandfather, everyone had their own understanding of that. And then they said to them, if he was alive today, what would he wear? And some people would say, well, he'd only wear all wool garments. Some said, they think he'd wear fashionable items. I mean, it's just like, it was just so interesting because we don't think about, we've kind of fixed him as a historical person, and he's not. He's in our hearts today, alive in us, and we need to think about how would he be in this society. Basically, he would be hidden. I mean, if he appeared now as he was at that time, he'd be arrested immediately. If you think about it, because he would be such a threat. In his time, he was almost anonymous. People came in and they saw Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, and they thought that was the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ was very humble and kind of not so, he didn't stand out as other maybe larger characters did. So, I mean, it's just, we need to understand him. The other question was, if he was alive today, what transport would he use? And some people say walk everywhere. Someone say ride a bicycle. Somebody said he'd drive a Mercedes. It's just like, but we need to think about this for our own personal identity if we're living in this society where we find ourselves. And this, this for me is an important subject. I did a project in 2005, I began it. And it came from me thinking about, at that time, the media was stereotyping Muslims as either being Pakistanis in curry shops and Arabs were smoking shisha in Edgware Road. This is how they were stereotyping Muslims. And I'm going, but that's not true. I know loads of friends who are English. I know a Muslim from Iceland. I know Scottish Muslims, Irish Muslims, French Muslims. That's not true. And so I thought you need to do a project, particularly about the UK, of English Muslims who are part of this society. And so thank God I got some small funding for it, and we began this project. And I made a long list of every profession I could think of. And I thought, okay, I need to find a Muslim of faith who is in that profession. And that's what I did, from people in the Lords and Parliament to young girls working in supermarkets to people working in, I can't think of the name now, one of the biggest tailor. I'm sorry, I'm a bit jet lagged because I've been frying, been in Saudi Arabia for 2 weeks. I've just come back, just in Manchester. But one of number 1 Savile Row, I found one of the top guys there was a Muslim measuring suits for people every day today. I found a young guy who's working in one of the big health places in Pall Mall, just giving people massages every day. I found people in every profession. Most people would not know they were Muslims, just working and serving in the community. And that was really, and I called as I said, the book, The Art of Integration.
I've got it here.
That's it. Yeah, that's it.
And I love the title, Islam in Our Green and Pleasant Land.
Yeah.
Even the title is so powerful.
Yeah, because it is. Islam, we're here in this green land, and many of us don't know, but there are hundreds and thousands of saints, Christian saints buried all over this island. Someone just told me when the Armada sank off of England, there were many Moroccans on that boat, and they were shipwrecked on land, and they integrated and married and stuff. We do not know our history of Muslims in this country. We know a little bit of it, but it's been happening for a long time, and we need to discover it. This is part of our identity here.
We have Abdullah Quilliam Mosque in Liverpool, and yeah, and there's a lot of work going on now to actually rediscover, and it is a matter of rediscovering because it's there, and I think it has been recorded, and the like Yahya Bertz, for example, and others, Ron Jeeves, have been working hard, particularly on this. And I think I think it's new to everyone.
Yeah,
Sorry.
and Lord Stanley, that's in the book, you know, he discovered this beautiful mosque that was established by St. Patrick when he was shipwrecked on Anglesey. And Lord Stanley, who was an aristocrat and who had accepted Islam and married a lady from Andalusia, he discovered the church in a very dilapidated state, and he restored it. He didn't convert it into a mosque. He kept it as a church, but he put Islamic stained glass windows in it. And there is a beautiful plaque saying that Lord Stanley, who was a Muslim, you know, restored this church. And it's a beautiful place. You know, I had it opened up. It's in the book. They opened it up for me so I could photograph it. There's one small mistake, though. On their plaque, it says that he was buried standing up, which is a bit of a misunderstanding about how Muslims are buried.
Okay. Yeah.
Obviously, they weren't, no one explained to them, but yeah, and he looks, you know, he looks very English. And there are a lot of characters like him. And in the description of him, that he was very humble and more Muslim than most of the Muslims living at that time, you know.
So in terms of this developing or perhaps rediscovering a kind of a British or UK or European, you know, identity, how much should that be not manufactured is the wrong word, but how does someone do that in a way that's natural and organic and doesn't feel reactionary or forced, for example?
Yeah. I think each person has to find how they are. It's been my own personal journey. You know, I always, whenever I wore robes and turbans, I always felt like I was dressing up. It just didn't feel like me. So I have to be who I am, but try and be as good of a Muslim as I can, because I'm very aware that I, as an English person, and I don't tell a lot of some of my neighbors know now because I've been living here a long time, but I don't tell people. It's my own personal thing. I'm very English in that way. But, you know, we need to be Muslim in the way we behave. We need to not talk about peace. We should be peaceful people. We need to be generous people. We need to be kind, and we need to take care of our neighbors. And that's, you know, that's what we're told to do as Muslims living in societies. And if we're Muslims, we shouldn't behave badly. I mean, it's the worst thing is to say I'm a Muslim and then you're like, I don't know, playing loud noise music or upsetting the neighbors or leaving your car parked. It's all these simple things that we sometimes forget. And it's just building that awareness of, okay, this is where I've been placed. What is my role? How do I serve the people around me to the best of my ability, you know? And that, I think that's it really. And then the rest is between you and God, really.
Yeah. And these are universal principles, right? This is things that everyone would agree on. There's nothing quote unquote Muslim specific on these kinds of issues. Like anyone, you know, faith or without would agree on these principles, right?
Yeah. I mentioned in the Art of Integration, there was a teacher from West Africa called Sheikh Ba. He's a great scholar, and he said that Islam is a clear and pure, unpolluted river. And he said that it takes on the color of the rocks that are on the riverbed. So if a clear river was going across black rocks, the water would look black. If the rocks were yellow, it would look yellow. And so he says, by that, Islam in African is African. Mm-hmm. You know, Islam in China is Chinese. And therefore, Islam in England is British. It has a British appearance. The Islamic stuff is all to do with our behavior and our inner dimensions and, you know, our relationship with God. But outwardly, we're English. And that's what I loved about China. They're so Chinese, the Chinese Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
Their whole culture is Chinese. They've developed their own Chinese calligraphy, Arabic calligraphy, but it's in a very flowing Chinese style. Their mosques, as I said, look like Chinese pagodas. It's very Chinese. You don't feel that they are Chinese who became Arab.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very important.
Mm. I wanted to talk about one of the, and you've touched on it in certain ways about heritage and the tradition of saints and men and women of God, and some of your latter work. So you've got, we can see behind you, Meetings with Mountains there, and which was 2019, I think.
Yes, 50 years project that was.
Oh wow! Okay, could you tell us a little bit more about that project?
Going well before I entered Islam, I began a spiritual journey which started in the late 60s, and it's very fashionable in those days to either go to Morocco or India, and I chose to go to India as a spiritual quest to answer certain questions that had occurred in me about my identity and my real need for some spiritual answers to certain ways I felt at that time. I started to feel anxiety and worry and stuff. And it was like I was uncomfortable with that. And I knew that there had to be some spiritual solution to that. And I began meditating for a while. And then once I started meditating, very vivid dreams and things. And I thought I need to find a teacher. So this sent me on my quest to India. And I spent 7 months in India looking at different religions. And I studied Hinduism and Buddhism and Sikhism. And I read a bit about Islam while I was in India. And consequently, to make this story, as you get older, you begin to understand, you see things that happened in your life that didn't really, they seem small incidents, but you realize they are very strong signs on your journey. So when I was in India, and you'll understand that this is a very photographic thing that I saw, I was on a 3-day train journey going from one place to another, stopped on a station just before dawn. And in those days, it's probably still the same in India, it always seems like the whole of India is on the move. So the station was fully packed with people, with luggage and stuff. And, I'm by myself, and it's kind of a bit chaotic, I would say. And suddenly I see this space not far from me, and I see this woman praying on a prayer mat. Now, I've never in this world seen the Muslim prayer before. So I went over there. There was a young man standing just to protect her. And I said, "Excuse me, but what's this?" And he said, "Oh, this is my grandmother. She's Muslim. She's doing the Muslim prayer." I said, "Oh, okay, got the answer." But if you think about it as a photographer, that was in a snapshot. I saw something, the chaos and the peace in one image. Mm-hmm. And that was placed inside my brain and heart and stored away. And it wasn't till I accepted Islam that I remembered that incident. And there's other things like that happened to me. One day I went out, I was living in Notting Hill Gate, late 60s, in a one-room attic flat that was painted bright sunshine yellow, including the bath and the radio. And it was a typical London grey day. And I thought, I need to go out and take some pictures. I need to find some inspiration. And I went out into the streets, and I wandered around, and I found a street, a very deserted street, derelict houses, and someone had painted the whole street black for a film set or something. And that was interesting in itself. But then I found a wall, and on this wall, someone had graffitied, "We teach all hearts to break." And I stood in front of this, and thought, what does this mean? We teach all hearts to break. And I lifted my camera up to take the picture, and a small boy, late for school, ran across the shop, which gave it, proportion and everything. And for me, that is a very strong image, because within 2 years of taking that picture, I had gone to India, traveled around India for 7 months, come back, accepted Islam, gone to Morocco, fasted my first Ramadan in Morocco with the teacher I mentioned. And 3 months later, because I was told he was going to perform Hajj, I made the intention to perform Hajj, although I had no money. And one evening, someone came to me and said, we have 7 tickets to go on Hajj and only 6 of us. They gave me a ticket. And so I performed the Hajj 3 months later. And when I got to the Kaaba, some of his followers came and told me that he died on the way to Hajj. So again, thinking I was going to meet him there, I met God instead. Or, and then the ayat, we shall show you our signs on the horizon and within yourselves, and you will know that that's the truth. And I connected that to the graffiti that we saw, that there's a process when you become a Muslim, that you go through a process, you shed things that are not necessary, and you embrace things that will enrich your life.
Have you written anything about, or have you ever considered, this came to me just earlier, have you ever considered writing an autobiography? Because I mean,
no, I have people ask me all the time. I wouldn't do an autobiography, because I would do a biography or memoir or something of the important events, but I need someone to help me. And I'm working with an editor, and she keeps on to me to do it. I need to clear the decks a little bit, but I've been at least kind of creating a timeline, so I've got kind of reference points. It's only with hindsight, as you get older. Rumi talks about this thing about, what does the ant know as he walks across carpet? Because he just sees, this pattern at close viewpoint, but the bird sees it from high up and can see the whole pattern and the unity of the whole thing. And I think that process begins to happen as you get older. And so I'm now beginning to, that's why that happened. That's why that happened. It's all these, which seem at the time insignificant or sometimes very difficult situations, but that we are being gently nudged in a certain direction.
It's really, really powerful imagery that's used there. And
I also want to do a photographic biography, and because it's really, people say, well, you were photographing rock stars in the 60s and now you're photographing saints. How do the two worlds match? And I say they match seamlessly as far as I'm concerned, because at the time in the 60s, those musicians, those poets were inspiration for me, will help me to understand the society I was living in. And now on a different journey, understanding of the spiritual journey, the saints and sages of the people that I go to, and I sit to have a one-to-one with them using my camera as a kind of way of connecting with them. It's the same process.
That's amazing. And in Meetings with Mountains, this is a collection of some of the encounters that you had with the men and women of God, right?
Yes. Go on.
How do you see, because we speak about heritage and we speak about tradition, but the idea that Islam is something that's current and it's existing, and these it's not a religion of kind of looking at relics and admiring it for the historical nostalgia. What do you see as the role of the even the concept of saints sometimes in an increasingly materialist and atheistic world?
Absolutely. This is a very important question. In every traditional society, not just Muslim, around the world, there's always elders who live within that community who people refer to for advice. And this is our way, you know, the Prophet ﷺ is the perfect model of that. And they're, as well as they're doctors for the physical body, they're doctors of the spiritual illnesses of the heart. And those spiritual illnesses actually are very prevalent now, extremely prevalent, people having mental illnesses and things. We need people that understand that, but it's considered old-fashioned, even in Muslim countries in a lot of places. It's forgotten, what's the word? It's not folk art, what's the word? That, you know, it's like from the past, it doesn't have any relevance to today. But someone said a very significant thing when we launched Meetings with Mountains in Bradford at the Literature Festival in 2019. They said, if you meditate on the faces of these people, enlightened souls, you begin to enter into their presence, and then by context, you enter into the presence of God, because these people have spent their whole lives worshipping, studying, working against their own selves to be better human beings. And for me, the most amazing thing about this project, because I'd been in India and I'd met gurus and things, that these people do not want to be photographed. Not because they think photography is forbidden. Their humility doesn't want them to appear as if they're something in society, because their opinion of themselves is that they are nothing, they're just servants of God. But of course, from that position, they have no ego. You know, the ego itself is gone. Where in this society do you meet people who have no ego? They have no concept of who they are because they're busy being who they are, which is a servant and slave of God. And so many of these people had never been photographed before, and for some reason they gave me permission. And I have to say that I'm not, in creating this book, I'm not, crude example, the Vatican sanctifying these people. This is my own personal journey, and anyone else would have a completely different journey, but they were people that I met. And I learned this from Ibn Battuta. Ibn Battuta, whenever he traveled, whenever he went to a country, he went to meet first the saints and the learned people of that country. And he would ask their permission and take their du'as and stuff for his journey, and then he traveled. And I thought that's such a great thing to do, you know, to take their prayers and things to protect you. And I tried to do that. And then as a photographer, I wanted to photograph them. And really, nobody refused me. And I thought, well, everybody keeps saying photography is haram. These people would not let me do it if it was forbidden. And I did get scared at one point, because I noticed many people I photographed suddenly died a few weeks later. And I got a bit nervous. This is like how much we think of ourselves. And I said, oh, if the word gets out, no one will let me take their pictures. And I spoke to a great scholar friend of mine who lives in Medina, and he laughed. He said, no, they're already on their way out. That's why they agreed to let you take their picture. So that was very consoling to me. And as I say, it's been over a 50-year project. But the reason I did, and one of the reasons I did, is when people tell you about this amazing scholar or this person, and they give you the name, it doesn't mean anything to me, right? I'm not a scholar in that way. I can't retain all the names. I always want to put a face to it. I'm like a young child in that way. And so putting a face to this means, okay, now I can read the story and I can relate it to the person. I can see their face. And then you can, and young people are really connected to this book. Even children as small as 7, their parents say, I see my young son just sitting and looking at the faces in the book. So there is some deep connection with these people. And of course, they are the, how can you say, the blueprint or the stars of our Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. You know, they're from his tradition, and they're the people we need. He's not alive today. He's not in our society. So we need these people as reference points when we have problems, challenges, you know, all this stuff that goes on in the world, money problems. You know, our faith disappears very quickly, and it's good to go and see someone and say, this is my situation. And they'll say, don't worry, it'll be resolved. Just recite this simple thing 10 times a day or something. And that's your medicine. Mm-hmm. And that's how it's always been.
And how important is it that other traditions and even you know, Western countries and the UK, for example, produces its own men and women of God? I know Sheikh Abdul Hakim Moradi has an amazing quote that really resonates deeply with me when he says that the purpose of religion is to create saints.
Yes, and it's also the importance of religion is to have knowledge of God. So you need to meet people who have knowledge of God. That's, you know, that's how you get that, and they will appear. We live at a time though where they're kind of hidden away because of the society we live in, and because it's becoming very materialistic and also secular, you know. But those of people of faith know that we need those people in our lives, you know, and we do. And within every religion, there's a history of saints and sages.
And even the term has become problematic with, you know, certain quite large sections of the Muslim community. The word saint will make people start twitching, and, you know, this isn't our tradition. We don't believe in saints. And even, you know, so if we were to exchange the term for something, you know, a person of God, for example,
yeah.
What is it you think that's caused this aversion to the concept of there being, the term notwithstanding, let's put aside the term, even though it is problematic in certain circles, the idea, what is it that makes certain Muslims not want to believe that there are people who are very close to God and have devoted their entire lives? What's your experience?
There's a whole indoctrination that it's shirk. This has been going on for 200-300 years. What were the Sahaba if they weren't saints? A saint is a human being, but he's also a man of God. You know, all of them, Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, Sayyidina Umar, Sayyidina Ali, all these people, all the Sahaba, they were saints, you know, and they had their own faults and they dealt with them. But they all had the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam within the great sage, within their company. It's just indoctrination that's tried to remove this. It's almost indoctrination to remove the spiritual aspect of Islam. And when I was, you know, on my quest and I came back, I went to see somebody who had accepted Islam, an English person, and I said to him, tell me about the spiritual practice of Islam. And he explained very carefully that these were the things the Prophet ﷺ did himself, the extra prayers, the extra fasting, you know, he's praying at night. These were all the things. But he said you can't take them by themselves. They're an integral part of Islam, which is the structure. If you just take those, you'll go crazy. He said it's like plugging into the mains without insulation. When he explained it like that, it made 100%. You need Islam, but you need that as well. Otherwise, Islam by itself is a cup with nothing in it. And if you take just the drink, it has no container. You need both. They're absolutely integral to one another. When he said that, made sense to me then. And he said, at some point you have to enter through the door of Islam. And I said, now I'm ready. As soon as he explained it like that to me, that was it. And I said the Shahada in a carpet shop in Chelsea in London.
Wow.
Yeah. And 3 weeks later, I went to Morocco.
Oh, wow.
My first Ramadan. And I remember thinking all day, oh, if I could just have a cup of tea, I'll be all right.
And in these meetings, you know, with these incredible people that you met, did you find a common thread that you could say this binds them together? I found.
Yes. One of the most common thing is that there is zero judgment when you sit in their presence. And you think of what's going on today with our youth online. They are being judged right, left, and center. And look at the problems, the mental problems this is causing. Each of us, an individual, knows our faults. But when you sit in that person, they are not judging you. And this is, people get scared, well, they can see who I am inside. That's not the process. When they see, and this was explained very clearly to me, they see you at a certain point in your spiritual journey. And they may, if they're very enlightened, can see certain challenges and things that you will need to undergo in your journey. And they will make prayers for you. They'll give you some guidance if you want it. And that's the process. They're there just to assist you in your journey and to keep your hope high, because it's very easy to lose hope, particularly for new Muslims. You know, you enter with a lot of hope and faith, and then you hit some very difficult issues, and then unless you have really good company around you, you will suffer. And that's very important when you become a Muslim. You need company, because when you talk to people, you find out they've gone through the same things as you. And these are not big issues. And they're part of the spiritual journey.
I mean, now, you know, what we're seeing just in terms of our own experience with New Beginnings, we launched in lockdown, and everyone was at home, and we had people who not everyone there had taken the Shahada, but they were on a journey of sorts, and you know, people were at different stages, and some in very isolated communities that we have now. We have people in the US with 2 hours from the nearest masjid, and so this idea of this virtual community has been really valuable. I mean, how important do you see the role of a virtual community in the modern world?
I think it's very important. We started something, we have a small group of friends, and we have known one another over 50 years, English and American Muslims. And also in COVID, I have friends, individual Muslims who live in remote places of Australia. And of course, COVID, they were isolated all over the world. There were people, and we decided to meet every Saturday and recite certain things together just for an hour. And it's a way of keeping that check on people. It's a way of keeping that iman high and everything. And we've kept it going from the beginning of COVID, and we still do it now. And it's not a big group of people, and people come and go because people have busy lives. But I just felt the importance of it, particularly, as I said, for people who are isolated. And then if we know if someone's sick, and we can pray for them together, it's a way of, you know, none of us group are getting younger, but it's a way of keeping a check on people. And so if they get really sick, we as a group can pray and ask others to pray for them. And this is how we look after one another, you know. It's so important.
It's so incredible. It's so incredible. This idea on this topic of kind of virtual community, how much is it a substitute of actual physical company? I mean, do you see it as something that's better than nothing, or do you think can it be?
No, I think it's better than nothing. I mean, there's nothing like hugging a friend and, you know, being in his presence. But the thing is, if you already know that person, then there is, you know, you have that connection anyway. It's difficult meeting. I think it's very difficult meeting people online for the first time. If I'm meeting a doctor for the first time, I want to go and see them physical. I need to know who they are and feel them, and then I can meet them online and we can discuss and stuff. You need that, I think, face to face. It is important, but I've spent a life traveling around the world, and I want to reduce that. It's very taxing on the body, and because of my work in the past, I've done trips. I've gone to Malaysia for 3 days and come back, and this is not good for the body. It's a lot of stress on the body, and I want to reduce that as I get older. But inshallah, I'll travel when it's necessary.
You've spoken a couple of times about the future of the importance of youth.
Yes.
Can you share some thoughts on what you think?
I mean, I think it's so important. The world is in a mess. I'm of an older generation. We're leaving this mess on the youth, and we're now more aware than the mess than ever, with the ecology movement and wars still going on. I mean, I grew up in the 60s. I'm an anti-war person. I don't see any benefit from wars. Why are they still happening? Well, there are obviously reasons. People make a lot of money from wars, and there's, invested interest. But I really believe that we should be a peaceful movement. We should be anti-war. How can we stand up against the weapons they have of today? Really, nobody. I know, I totally agree about standing up about unjust governments, but what are you going to do if they have weapons that can wipe out millions of people? So we need to engage with people. We need to become peaceful beings, not talk about peace. We need to be peaceful beings, ambassadors of peace, promote peace. This is our world. This is what the Prophet ﷺ came for.
Inshallah, there are fruits to those concerns and those efforts.
Inshallah, it is extremely important.
Do we have time for a few questions, Peter? Yeah.
Yes, of course.
If anyone would like to ask Peter a question, feel free to unmute yourself, or you can type a message in the room. And just while we kind of receive any questions, so the photography that you took on this recent trip to Saudi Arabia, is this part of an upcoming project, or is?
Yes, I'm working with a great scholar who's doing incredible work to make people aware of the sacred sites there. And he's very thorough. He doesn't take common knowledge that this thing happened there. He goes deep into the books of hadith and stuff. He goes to the places. He spent 25 years traveling these routes by himself and exploring them and getting to know them, and has discovered incredible treasures on these sacred routes, on the Hijra route and the pilgrimage routes. And there was a famous route, it's called the Dar al-Anbiya, the route of the prophets, which was from southern Arabia, which went all the way to Jerusalem. And he started discovering that in Arabia there was what he would call milestones. They're actually every mile. The mile, which is 1,000 footsteps, is an old measurement before Islam and everything. And he started discovering every mile that there would be these stones, pillars, but from not a round pillar, but large stones, slightly larger than a human being, so people knew they were on the right route. And when he didn't discover them, he would use GPS and then start to dig down, and he would find them buried. So up to now, he's found over 50. And what he's trying to do is to get them preserved, because, as I said, modern infrastructure is, some of them are getting knocked down and stuff. And so this is, again, very important for us, for our history and our identity, to understand this. And for me, one of the most important things was that this connects me with all the other prophets, and there are places where the Prophet ﷺ said, I saw Sayyidina Isa, I saw Sayyidina Ibrahim, I saw come through this, passageway. So that it's known that these prophets traveled this route. And yeah, for me, it's a great honor and incredible work, but it's also probably the most challenging photographic work I've ever done in my life.
Wow.
Because he'll tell me the story, and we go there, and I go there, there's nothing there. There's no structure or anything for me to know this is where it happened. But we just know at this sand dune or this point by this rock or by this mountain, this event happened. And of course, the first thing I have to do is I need to make the clay clean, sanctify it, and then I have to begin to try and put what was in the past into a beautiful picture. And it's not easy work. But we're now onto the third book. I think the first book was the Hijra route, the second book was the milestones, and now this third book will be the pilgrimage routes, which will probably be published next year.
Wow, what an incredible service that's being done, and I'm sure what a blessing it is to be so instrumental in part of preservation of that heritage.
It's my duty, God gives us gifts and we need to use them for the best purpose that we can. And I've always felt that, and I've always felt honored that I can be used in this way to do it. It's tough though. I mean, I can't say it's easy, I still think I'm 25, but my body says, no, you're not. So
May Allah keep you safe and keep you well and in good health, inshallah, and allow you to continue to share your gifts with us. We have a question. Assalamu alaikum. Who have you met recently who you would classify as a person of God? You said some of those you took photographs had passed away. I ask us to give hope for us to meet the people of God.
Yeah. Since I finished the book, and I don't feel that journey is finished, but it's a kind of, that chapter is finished, and I've been, as I said, now I'm working on the Chinese book. I'm doing the prophet. So I haven't had time to go and seek out people. And we did an extension of that project afterwards called Exemplars for Our Time, where we were able to tell the biographies of some of these great people and their stories. Some of them lived incredible lives. So that was a follow-up project. So I kind of feel that I've kind of truly ticked that box at the moment. The idea of bringing exemplars back into our tradition is really important, particularly for the youth, because of all the extremism that happened in the last 20 years, and they need to be directed in the right direction. So I haven't been searching any, but believe me, they are around. If you want to find them, ask God to guide you and show you, because they're individual. They're not always public figures for everybody. Your own personal teacher is unique to you, and you need to find somebody that you really connect with. And, be careful. Check them out. There's many people who claim to be saints and have huge followings, and just be very careful. If they ask you for money, just say Salam alaikum and go out and leave it, because the real people don't ask for anything from you other than your prayers and stuff. So that's important. But we do need them. We need guides. If you're climbing a high mountain, you cannot do it without a guide. And this is very important. But if you don't have them, you have the Prophet ﷺ and all his counsel and books and wisdom and stuff. And there are a lot of great scholars in England who you can refer to, including Abdul Hakim, of course, who's a very important reference point in the UK. And there are others like him doing amazing work, really. So there are people here.
Alhamdulillah. It's a really powerful analogy that you give about climbing a mountain, and some useful criteria there. A question, did the subject of the Uyghurs come up whilst you were in China?
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting subject. I was in that area before it really became very bad, but there were certain sensitivities. There's been sensitivities in that area, but I don't want to get into that in my book. I'm not a politician, and it doesn't help by making an issue about that. This book is about the history of Islam in China, and I really want the book to be published in Chinese. And if I get into that, the book will be banned. How does that help? And so I also haven't been back to China since all that has happened, but I traveled in that area right across the whole of Western China, and I went to Kashgar and Hami, Rimchki, all these places I went to. It's beautiful, and you'll see all the pictures in the book. They're beautiful Muslims there, and of course it's terrible what's happening, but I as an individual can't do anything. You know, collectively we need to do something, but it's not in my position to do anything, you know, and it won't help, you know, it will just, I'm nobody, you know. It's one of those situations we need to have discussions. It's, you know, it's no point in locking horns. We need to sit down with people and resolve these issues, you know, and not have always resort to conflict to resolve. It doesn't help anything.
Mm-hmm.
This is, as far as I understand, this is our Prophet's way, was always to try and compromise and find a solution, whatever it is.
Just a final question, because I'm conscious of your time, Peter. Salam alaikum, Peter. Thank you for your wonderful talk. I was wondering what the most challenging thing you photographed.
Well, I mean, I'm doing it. This, you know, this stuff I think, to be honest, this work that we're doing in Saudi Arabia on the Hijra routes is for me the most challenging, because how do I put into an image, for instance, the story of the Prophet ﷺ and Bad, you know, when they were making Hijra, he wanted some goat's milk, and they went to this very small village, and Bad said, you know, there's one goat, it hasn't given milk for years. And the Prophet ﷺ prayed and milked her, and she gave milk. But Bad gives the best physical description of the Prophet ﷺ. And I asked my scholarly friend, why is that? And he said, because he's a woman and women notice everything. And so he told me the story, and then I got to the place and there was nothing there. It was a small little kind of sand dune with grass shoots. And I'm going, how do I translate that into what he already told me? And this everywhere he takes me, the story about Sayyidina Aisha radiallahu anha losing the necklace, all these amazing stories which have so much wisdom in them. How do I, as an artist, if I can even be allowed to use that word, create something that will invoke an element of that? It's extremely challenging, you know, and I think it's probably the toughest thing I've ever had to do. You know, photographing a saint is easy compared to that, because I have the physical saint in front of me. Here I have nothing than what's accumulated on an incident that happened 1500 years ago. But all I can do is try and create a beautiful picture that at least hints at something, you know. I don't know whether I'm achieving it or not, but Dr. Abdullah wants me to do it, so.
Is there time for one more question?
Yeah, I do have a whole group of people waiting for me, so yeah, please.
Okay. Thank you. Can you share a story of a man or woman of God that impacted you most?
Oh, and there are so many, and I'm glad they've reminded me, because one of the things, there's an idea that saints and sages it's a man majority thing. One of my great teachers said, many of them said, but one of the great teachers said it's 50-50, 50% women, 50% men. This is not a male-orientated sector of the community, and there are as many women as there are men, great women saints, but they are very hidden. They said to me, the men are hard enough to find, the women are even harder. And to read the stories fully, you need to read the book. I'm trying to think in something that I can tell. I had finished the book, to be honest. I met somebody and I said, he's the last teacher to go in the book. I'm not going to add anyone else. And then I went to an event one evening. I gave a talk about the book and the idea and what was happening. And this lady came up to me afterwards, an elderly English lady, so full of light, beautiful English lady. Name was Yasmin. And we talked a little, and she began to tell me a story. And I said to my wife, there has to be room for one more. And I went to the ladies, I agreed to go to her house and interview her and take her picture. And she told me a story, and I need to be very brief with it, but basically she was at university, she met a Muslim who asked her to get married, and she said, I'll marry you, but I'm not becoming a Muslim. And he said, that's fine. And he was happy with that. And she became a Muslim. And then obviously she became curious and sort of what's this Quran all about, and started reading the Quran. And of course she became a Muslim. But then he died very young. Now, she told me as a young woman when she was growing up, her deceased, whenever she got really sick, she would go to bed and her deceased grandmother would appear in the room and be sitting next to her. And she would know by the presence of her grandmother that everything would be all right, and she would recover and she would carry on. This happened many times. So when her husband died, she decided that she wanted to go and make Hajj. And she made preparation to perform the Hajj. And then she got sick. She retired to bed as she always did. But this time it was not a grandmother appeared in the room. It was an elderly gentleman, but very illuminated being. She'd never seen him before. And she knew from his presence that everything was okay and that she would be all right. A few days after that, she went into a Muslim bookshop, and she hadn't been in there for a long time, and she saw a book with a man's face on it. She said to the man who owned the bookshop, who is this man? He visited me in my room last night. And they explained that he was a great scholar from Yemen who lived in Saudi Arabia. His name was Habib Ahmed Mashur al-Haddad. And he said, if you're going to Saudi Arabia to perform the Hajj, you should go and visit him afterwards. He lives in Jeddah. So she went and did the Hajj. She always loved the word mashallah. And so when she was in Mecca, she bought a necklace that had the word mashallah, and she put it inside her dress. She did the Hajj. And she did the Hajj. And afterwards, she went to visit Habib Ahmed at his house. She went to the house, and he, from a long distance, went walking towards her and said, mashallah. And he became her teacher, and he was her guide for the rest of his life until he passed away. And that was her story. And it's such a beautiful story. And she's this elderly woman, or a lot of the Muslim women came round and liked to sit with her and look after her and make food for her. And that was her life until she passed away. And she used to make prayer beads. She used to go to charity shops and buy old necklaces and make prayer beads out of them and give them to people as gifts. And that was her life, you know. She was such the full story is in my book, and she's the last person in the book. And I was so happy it was a woman as well, you know. So that's, yeah.
And this is meetings with mountains.
Yeah,
the one behind you. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and she was such a lovely. I was so fond of her. I felt like I met a twin soul in her. You know, and she's so sweet and so kind and so humble and amazing and very English, which I responded to.
From Blackburn is
Blackburn.
Yeah. Wow, what a beautiful story to
Yeah.
conclude.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Peter, for your time. You've been extremely generous with your time, and we're really fortunate to have had you. Could you close with a short dua?
Bismillah. The prayer, this is a prayer that the Prophet ﷺ made regularly, which was, "Oh Allah, keep me in the company of the ones you love and guide me to their actions that you love." And I think that's really important, that we embark on the real meaning of love. It's like, you know, I read a book a long time, the real path to love is servitude. And if you serve people and help people, God will put heart, because they love you and God will love you. And that's what all of us want, you know, that's what the Prophet ﷺ brought for us. And I pray for everybody that we can all embark on this path. You know, it's been betrayed, it's been lied about, it's been destroyed, and we need to revive it as it was at that time. We need to understand who the Prophet ﷺ was. He was an immense being. We know a tiny bit of him. He was an immense being. He had incredible compassion and rahmah for the whole world. And this world needs it more than ever. Look what's happening in the world. Look at the awful stuff that's going on. We need to bring mercy back. Otherwise, we'll be just destroyed as a race, you know. Yeah, I mean, really, that's my prayer, really. Inshallah, simple.
Thank you so much, and may your works be a gateway to open that world of the people of God to us.
Make dua. Allah gives me energy and strength to continue, inshallah.
Ameen. And please apologize to your guests on behalf of New Beginnings, and do thank them for us.
Yeah, I do appreciate your questions. They're very, very heart touched. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We'll speak again, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Take care.
Take care. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.